r/felons. Outcast34 says, they should abolish background checks and references for jobs that do not involve vulnerable people and jobs that do not involve public safety. They should abolish background checks and references for jobs that do not involve vulnerable people and jobs that do not public safety law enforcement/military type jobs. It's a waste of time and resources implementing background checks and references for jobs that don't involve vulnerable people and jobs that do not involve public safety and doesn't make sense financial wise. Also, having background checks or references for jobs that don't involve public safety and don't involve vulnerable can cause involuntary homeless and involuntary unemployment along with recidivism rates. And conservatives wonder why people don't want to work and why we have so many homeless people. Here's an interesting fact: references and background checks didn't exist until 1970s and criminal records were first recorded in 1285 England. Back in the Stone Age, cavemen era and medieval era, people could move out of town if they did something heinous, could get jobs without references and background checks. Now in the 21st century, everything is on the internet, like arrest records, convictions, and credit checks etc. Yes, I realize the punishment for crimes was severe in medieval times, but people could get away and move town since there was no DNA evidence and technology at that time period. Opposite says, what about those who have financial crimes and want to work in insurance or banking? What about those with theft on their record wanting to work a retail store or hotel housekeeping? What about those with drug problems working in a pharmacy? This list could be endless. Background checks are important. Part of becoming a criminal is the liability that you may not be able to obtain certain employment opportunities. Sure, you've served your time, but part of the onboarding and interview process is to study your character historically to see if you're a fit. It's why we have resumes. I agree that there should be some additional support for felons and that many are underserved. But you broke the law, dude. Some folks don't want to trust you, and based on some people's history, should they be trusted? For many businesses it's just not worth the risk. Hydragood says, frick that. If I make a company, I deserve the right to check people's criminal background and professional references before I hire them. Smurf says, there are people who commit crimes because they are criminals, not just because they are broke and need to pay bills and can't get a job. I think background inquiries should go back 7 years and be on a case-by-case basis, based on rehabilitation and social progress made by persons with background issues. Creepilegi63 says, I'll hire whom I please using whatever criteria I please. Whatever laws get passed don't matter to me because I ignore them. Jelin says, you have a really weak argument if you have to bring up cavemen as examples for your point. Outside Reserve 2407 says, back in the Stone Age, cavemen era and medieval era, people could move out of town if they did something heinous, could get jobs without references and background checks. During the medieval era, many societies branded auto-2 ex-cons, often on their faces. That was a background check of sorts. Suspicious Fish 7281 says, I fear that without official background checks you are just going to get the old unofficial background checks that we used to use. Like, does he go to your church? How long has he lived in the community? Did he play on your high school football team? Is he Mary's an accountant's husband's cousin? Is his dad a good guy? Is she cute and single? There have always been background checks. Windex8 says, that's gonna be a no for me, Doc. Vulnerable or not, we all make choices, and those follow us with varying levels of consequences. I chose to start a business, and I want to know who's working for me. I wouldn't give a frick if you were a felon, but if you were convicted of a crime against children, I only want to see you get thrown out of a helicopter into the mouth of a volcano. r/felons. Kitsunes says. Pled a first-degree assault case down to fourth-degree gross misdemeanor, convicted of a separate charge while on probation. Minnesota. 30 years ago I was charged with a first-degree assault. I pled the case down to a fourth-degree gross misdemeanor, just to get it over with. Huge mistake on my part, I know. A year later I get charged and convicted of a second-degree assault. The gross misdemeanor is now a first-degree assault on my record. Do I have any options in dealing with that, or will I have no choice but to live with a first-degree assault conviction on my record? Where a plea says. It's almost impossible to get anything done with violent charges, especially when they have a pattern. Even if you can get it sealed or expunged, it still comes up on FBI checks, and anytime you get near a pig, they run your name and start punishing you all over again for shit that usually wasn't real in the first place. r/felons. Thekush says. Us citizen visiting Canada. Felony charge and conviction 27 years ago. Still not allowed in Canada? Let's say I wanted to take a cruise to Canada or visit for a Formula 1 race. Will I be stopped at the border and not allowed to board a cruise? Experiences? Thoughts? Nat Ankman says. I was told in a class in prison that you can contact the consulate and apply for permission with them. If you have paperwork granting clearance, they might take a long look, but they can't deny you. Of course, the consulate could say no, and that would also be your answer. Jeremy0405 says. Boarding a cruise is a bit different. You don't even need a passport for a cruise. It's just suggested in case you get stuck there. Hedinger Ed Caveman says. I just looked into this for myself recently. I cannot enter Canada with a felony on my record from 20 years ago. I can try, but likely I'll be detained and given a negative record for trying to enter a country, and being denied goes on your federal records and other countries will prohibit you from visiting, because I would be on a list just from trying to enter Canada to see a close friend. The pardons from the Canadian government are not being issued post-COVID as much as they were prior to COVID. They tightened their borders, and I was advised by a lawyer not to bother the risks of entering on my own or even try for a pardon. Austin Correa says. I have a felony from 25 years ago. I have been to Canada twice since then. In 2019, I drove in, and last year, I flew into Toronto. Both times I was let in, no problem. Background guest 742 says. Get it expunged. Gloomy Impression 928 says. Last time I was there they found out that I had a felony conviction probably 25 years old. It was for leaving the scene of an accident with injuries, so just a minor felony. They told me if I tried to return to Canada I wouldn't need to arrange for accommodations, they would take care of that for me. Snailfish 2708 says. I didn't have any issues crossing to Canada with a felony from 2011 and 2015. Also went for the F1 race. Honestly, I didn't even know that was a thing. Is it different for driving across versus flying? We use the Nye entry point near Niagara Falls. r/felons. Dubai 3686 says. Plea Deals. Has anyone had their charges reduced from a violent felony to a misdemeanor? What were the circumstances? My ex strangled me until I lost consciousness several months ago. I called 911 immediately. He was arrested for assault and strangulation, and I spent the night in the hospital. I immediately got a restraining order, which he has since violated, and cut all contact. I'm trying to mentally and emotionally prepare myself for wherever this ends up. Of course, I want him to be charged with the crimes he committed against me and nothing less. It seems like the detectives and dad are very confident that that will happen, but I'm really scared. Rankinator Prime says. It happens frequently in domestic violence cases, but usually only if the victim, you, tells the prosecutor that you want the charges dropped. Often when that's the case, the prosecutor will offer a misdemeanor plea deal, or even drop the case entirely, instead of a felony, mostly because the odds of a felony conviction take a huge hit if the victim isn't willing to testify, doubly so if the victim plans on testifying for the defense instead, especially if they are the only witness as well. In your case, where you want the charges pursued, yeah, it's still possible the charges could be lowered or dropped. It depends on how much evidence is in your favor. Plea deals are largely a matter of the defense leveraging circumstances and or lack of evidence to convince a prosecutor to avoid a lengthy or losing trial. If the only evidence they have is your statement and the hospital report, they could offer him a lower charge. If you have a report from the hospital clearly laying out how they think the injuries happened, photos of the injuries, statements from others that he abused you, etc., those charges will be easier to make stick. Too long, didn't read, it happens somewhat frequently. It depends on how much evidence there is he committed the crime. SN6053 says, an expensive lawyer can get this done for a first offense. Depends on circumstances. Classel 3 American says, the prosecutor should work very hard for you if you are willing and able to cooperate. The vast majority of DV cases are dropped because the witness, victim, doesn't want to proceed. Good Day S0NSH1 Northeast says, statistics say because strangulation was involved you are at higher risk for homicide. Please do everything you can to protect yourself. Reasonable Crow 2086 says, I'm sorry, honey. In my experience the system will not protect you. Get the hell away from there. DM me if you need help scheming. 3 Rotten Branches says, yes, I was charged with 2 felonies, assault with a deadly weapon to commit bodily harm. In the 19 months it took for the case to work its way through the courts, I went back to college, did very well etc, paid handsomely for a competent attorney who bargained both down to misdemeanors. Had no priors, owned my behavior, presented well, and white. The Brian Dude says, if you cooperate with the DA his charges will likely stick. If you don't cooperate and decide to help him the charges would likely be reduced. It is highly unlikely a DV case anywhere will be dismissed, even if the victim doesn't want prosecution. The state picks up the case. It also depends on his attorney and how good/powerful they are. If it's his first offense it may become a misdemeanor. Report it every time he violates the restraining order if you want him gone and out of your life. Each violation hurts his case and can get him locked up each time. That's all for this video. Thank you for watching. Please subscribe.